Last year was my first year as a teacher, it was my training year, and in that time I made a lot of mistakes. Being disorganized, worrying too much, behaviour management, routines. It is so important to feel in control of your own classroom. There were times where I felt like my classroom was in control of me. Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you didn't already know, then my name is Miss Ross and I am a recently qualified Scottish primary teacher. I make a lot of different videos on my channel about my experiences as a teacher. Today I'm going to be reflecting back on my NQT or my probation year. Essentially last year was my first year as a teacher, it was my training year, and in that time I made a lot of mistakes. As teachers, we're always looking to improve and try to provide the best possible learning experiences for our pupils. Today we're going to be reflecting on some of the mistakes that I made, some of the things I've learned from since my probation year, and I'm also hopefully going to give you some tips so that if you're in the same position that I was last year, maybe you're a student teacher or you're a recently qualified teacher yourself, then hopefully you will learn from the mistakes that I made. So the first mistake that I made during my probation year was worrying too much. During my probation year I was a very anxious teacher. I was constantly overthinking things and stressing out about just about everything. I feel like I did ask for a lot of help. I think a big part of that was the whole teacher imposter syndrome thing. I just didn't feel good enough and I was really lacking in self-confidence. Looking back now, I wish I'd just been braver to do my own thing. I had this constant feeling of having to ask permission to do things and seeking approval from the other members of staff in the school, and also I think the fact that I felt that I had to impress everyone and make a good impression so that I would hopefully get a job at the end of my year and get a good recommendation from my head teacher. So that was something I was really nervous about. I was terrified of the thought of having to apply for jobs and do interviews. If I could go back, I definitely would have experimented a lot more. I wouldn't have got as bogged down when things weren't working. I would have just tried to stay a bit more positive and go with the flow more. Because now I look back at my probation year and I just wish that I'd enjoyed having my first class more and stopped stressing about things. You're not going to walk into this career being some fully fledged, all singing, all dancing teacher and be expected to know everything. And I just think I put a lot of pressure on myself and I wish that I hadn't. The next mistake that I made was being disorganised. Even going back into when I was at uni and I was doing my student teaching placements, I just did not have a very good filing system. I wish I'd been more proactive back then, looking ahead to my future career. For example, saving resources that I'd made and lesson plans from things that I taught during my placements. I wish, I'd saved all of my lesson PowerPoints so that I would save time for myself in the future having to look for them again. Especially since I did the 4-year course, I had a lot of placements across, different stages of the primary school, and that would have really helped me to start gathering resources and keeping all of my notes together. I did eventually end up buying a hard drive where I now store everything that I use. So if you are sitting here and you're a student, then that is definitely one of my biggest tips for you. Get organised and save everything. Take pictures of awesome displays that you see in schools that you're on placement on. Ask the teacher if you can save different resources that have been effective in the classrooms you've seen. I don't know how many times I've thought back to something that I did on a placement or something that I observed in a placement and wished that I'd made note of that resource so that I could use it again, like with my own class now. Something else that I've seen a lot of teachers doing is when they are doing an art lesson and when you create the exemplar piece, like the here's one I did earlier piece, I have seen a lot of teachers put them into Polly Pockets and they've got like a big folder of art resources so that they don't have to spend time making templates and things like that. They've got them all saved and organised into different topics. I also wish that I'd made my teacher Instagram a lot sooner. I feel like that would have really helped me with ideas and inspiration for my own classroom in my probation year. And also in the kind of organisation section, when it comes to having your own classroom, I definitely wish I'd been more organised from the start. Make sure your classroom is tidy. I was so guilty for having such a messy desk and that just added more stress into my life that I didn't need. Make sure you keep tidy habits in your classroom. Remember that you're a role model to the children in your class, and the fact that my desk and my kind of work area was messy and disorganised, I feel like that did have an impact on the children as well. Something that I was very naive about and I didn't think about much before I started my probation year in the August was how I was going to lay out my classroom. Everything should have a place. Where are your early finisher tasks, your games, resources that pupils can access for help? Try and utilise the space that you have in the most efficient way possible. I definitely didn't think through my classroom space. Things like where my pupils would put their finished work, where I would put my marking, working. It's really important to involve your pupils in the organisation of the space so that they're able to independently access resources as well. Make sure you've printed out all of the timetables on the wall, you've got copies of your group lists available. Plan for your classroom assistants so that they can help you to stay on top of things that need photocopied and displays that need put up. That kind of links onto my next mistake that I made, which was routines. I cannot stress how important it is to have really solid routines in the classroom. I think it makes such a difference, and this was something that I really regretted in my probation year, not establishing a clear routine from day one. And I think a big part of why I made that mistake was the fact that, you know, I was just a new teacher. This was my first time ever running my own classroom, and that wasn't something which I'd had a lot of experience of. So hindsight is a wonderful thing, and now I realise the importance of creating really good routines. It is so important to talk them through your expectations, and sometimes it can be a little bit patronising, but be very clear on your expectations for how tidy the classroom should be, where things should go. I actually use a task board now for absolutely everything. That was definitely something that I learned in my probation year that has been a huge help. I've learned now, which seems like an obvious one, but to have a clear area for people to put their work once it's finished, have different marking trays for ongoing work, for completed work, for stuff that needs filed into folders. In my probation year, I would always just kind of ask them to dump their jotters on my desk or on the floor, and it would really stress me out because things would get lost, pupils wouldn't know where to put things, and I feel like having a disorganised space just results in having unsettled, disorganised children as well. I am thinking about filming a video about my current classroom, giving you a little bit of a tour and showing you, my tips and tricks for setting up your classroom. So if that's something you'd be interested in, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. My next mistake that I made during my NQT year was wasting my time. I spent a lot of time faffing. I spent a lot of time moaning to other members of staff if I'd had a bad day. I spent a lot of time stressing and overthinking about things rather than actually dealing with those things. Something that I've learned, especially as an upper school teacher, is that children are able to do things independently, and it's so important to train them to be able to do that, because that frees up a lot of time for you to be able to get things done in school and make the most of the time that you have in school. In my current class now, I use any free minute that I have to be getting on with something, whether that's planning or marking, rather than in the past where I would be sitting at my desk waiting for a pupil to ask for help or just wandering around the classroom and observing. Your time is so scarce as an NQT, and I feel like I reached a point where my to-do list was so long and I was just trying to get through each day, and I was spending all day teaching, and then after school I was having to chase my tail planning for the next day. That was such a bad habit to get into. I was literally exhausting myself. Nobody wants to spend every single day of the week after school planning and spending time at the weekends getting organised when you could be using the time where you're actually in school. A few of the tips that I have for working smarter in school would be to have drawers for each day of the week. I make sure to photocopy all of my resources in advance, preferably a week in advance if I'm that organised, and I have them filed in their relevant drawers ready to go. My next tip is to use your classroom and teaching assistants wisely. Have a plan of action, have a list of things that need to be done, share the load a little bit. There would be so many times where a teaching assistant would ask me if I had any jobs for them to do, and I'd either say, oh no, that's okay, because I felt bad, and it was something that I thought I would just be able to sort out for myself. But it is so important that you use what you have available to you. There are just some little jobs that you never seem to have time to get around to, and having someone on hand to help can make a huge difference. This one is a bit controversial, but I think it just depends on the type of person you are. I would definitely say do not leave school until you're organised for the next day. I promise you that it will help you feel so much better when you eventually do get home. The more organised you are, the less stressed you're going to feel, especially when it comes to weekends. Don't leave on a Friday knowing that you're going to have to give up some of your weekend to get organised for the week ahead. Just try your best to use the time you have in school, even if it is cutting a wee 10-15 minutes off your lunchtime. I am notorious for being one of the first ones in school in the morning, but that's just because I am a morning person and I like to be organised. It is still so important to maintain that work-life balance. one of my tips for maintaining a work-life balance and reducing your workload a little bit is to not reinvent the wheel. I've learned the hard way that you cannot afford to be a perfectionist as a teacher. You can't always design your own personalised resources. You don't need to create things yourself, you know, in order for your pupils to meet the learning intention. It's okay to find pre-made resources, and you know, textbook work every so often does no harm. Okay, and lastly is the biggie. This is the one that I feel I've just changed my outlook on so much in the last year since my probation year. Behaviour management. I am thinking of making another completely separate video just surrounding the area of behaviour management, but for the sake of today's video we'll dip into it. Dealing with challenging behaviour can be a really tricky one, and this was something that as a new teacher I hadn't really come up against before. I was really lucky that a lot of the placements that I was on, you know, I was working with some really great classes and I never really struggled with challenging behaviour. So I was in for a real shock when I actually did encounter this. My probation year was a huge learning curve, and although I found it challenging, I am so grateful that I was able to have the experiences that I did, because it's just transformed me as a teacher. It is so important to feel in control of your own classroom, and I will definitely admit that during my probation year there were times where I felt like my classroom was in control of me. Becoming a badass teacher takes a lot of time and confidence. It's not possible to send for management every single time there is an altercation in your classroom. You are going to have to take matters into your own hands sometimes. You need to find something that's going to help you manage the classroom on the day-to-day, that works for you and helps you to feel in control. But it also needs to be something that pupils are going to buy into as well, which is the tricky bit, because every class is different, every learner is different, and not one strategy is always going to work for everyone. It's not an exact science. Nothing will prepare you for what you're going to experience in the classroom some days. My main tip would be to try and stay as positive as you possibly can. Stay cool, calm and collected. And I think that's just about it really for the kind of main mistakes that I feel like I made in my probation year. Although I did make a lot of mistakes during my probation year, I feel like that's what it's all about. It is a year of learning. The mistakes and the challenges that I faced last year were definitely the making of me and have made me the teacher that I am today. I'm still definitely not perfect, but I am definitely so much more confident, and hopefully through watching today's video it's given you some tips and advice on how you can learn from the mistakes that I made. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you give it a like and you subscribe to my channel to see other future videos about teaching related content. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!